An officer humiliated Jasmine Crockett in front of her son, calling her a threat. But when she calmly lifted her phone, the entire bank froze. In just minutes, the system that backed him would collapse, and he had no idea what was coming. But let's start from the beginning. The shout heard around the bank, "Jasmine." Crockett wasn't looking for trouble that Saturday morning. If anything, she was determined to make it the kind of day Carter would remember. Simple, sweet, ordinary. She had promised him pancakes at Marla's diner after the bank and a long afternoon at Marigold Park, where he could race up and down the slides and try to beat his record on the jungle gym. No drama, no battles. Just a clean, sunny day with her son. She adjusted Carter's jacket as they crossed the wide parking lot of Riverfront National Bank, the February wind tugging at his hood. "Hold my hand, baby. It's busy today," she said. Inside the lobby, the fluorescent lights hit her first, harsh and sterile. Then the marble floors, polished so smooth that every step echoed slightly. But it wasn't the light or the shine that made her gut twist. It was the silence. The unnatural, almost surgical quiet that blanketed the room the moment they entered. Dozens of heads turned toward them. Tellers behind bulletproof glass, a woman scribbling a deposit slip, an old man clutching a briefcase too tightly. Their gazes weren't curious. They were clinical, cold, suspicious. Carter squeezed her hand tighter. His small voice broke the unnatural quiet. "Mom, why's everyone staring?" Jasmine forced a smile for him, squeezing back. "Don't worry, baby. They're just surprised to see someone as handsome as you." But even as she spoke the words, a familiar prickle crept up her spine. The same one she'd felt too many times before. In grocery stores, in airports. Now here, in a place where money and power mixed like gasoline and sparks. She straightened her back. She had been through worse. Her plan was simple. Approach the nearest open teller, complete the deposit transaction, and walk right back out into the sunlight where Carter could run free without judgment pressing down on him. They made it only 3 steps toward the line before the bark came. "Ma'am, step away from the line." The words cracked like a whip across the marble, turning every head their way again, this time with an open, hungry tension. The voice belonged to a man standing near the security desk. Officer Blake Rigsby. Jasmine turned slowly, shielding Carter instinctively behind her. Rigsby strode forward, his boots heavy on the floor, his presence designed to dominate the room. He was big, easily 6'3", built broad at the shoulders, his short cropped hair giving him a bulldog appearance. His uniform was pressed to the point of creasing, his badge polished to a near blinding sheen. But it wasn't the uniform or the badge that made Jasmine's chest tighten. It was the look in his eyes, that brittle mix of suspicion and authority, sharpened by something uglier he didn't bother to hide. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask why she was there. He pointed. He yelled. "This woman's suspicious," he announced loudly, jabbing his finger toward her like she was a virus to be isolated. "Possible fraud. Step aside before I have to make this physical." Gasps rippled through the lobby. A mother pulled her toddler closer. An elderly man shifted uncomfortably in his loafers. And Carter, sweet, wide-eyed Carter, pressed himself harder into Jasmine's side, his tiny arms encircling her waist in a silent plea for protection. Jasmine could feel his heart hammering against her ribs, quick and frantic. Her own heart pounded too, but it wasn't fear that fueled it. It was rage. Rage, pure and electric, surged up her spine. Rage at being judged before a word left her mouth. Rage at being criminalized in front of her child. Rage that this was still happening. Again, and again, and again. No matter how careful she was. The old instincts roared to life inside her. Don't escalate. Stay calm. Don't give him what he wants. But another instinct was louder now. Carter needed her to be unbreakable, not just for herself, for him. She knelt down briefly to Carter's level, brushing a loose curl from his forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, voice steady. "Stay right beside me. Hold my hand." When she rose, she turned to Rigsby fully, standing tall, shoulders back, chin lifted, the way she had once walked into federal courtrooms filled with hostile eyes and hidden daggers. Instead of shouting, instead of pleading, she met his gaze with a cold, measured calm that rattled him more than any outburst ever could. "You have 4 minutes to change your mind, officer," Jasmine said, her voice low and razor-sharp. "Or you're going to regret this for the rest of your career." The words didn't need to be loud. They cut through the silence like a scalpel. Rigsby's smirk faltered. Just a flicker. But it was there. A flicker of something he hadn't expected. Defiance. Intelligence. Danger. The clock above the teller desk ticked loudly in the quiet. Each second slicing away at the fragile balance Rigsby didn't realize he was about to lose. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground in the center of the lobby, Carter's small hand gripping hers like an anchor. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. Just her, Carter, and the man who thought he could humiliate her into submission. The system didn't know it yet. The bank didn't know it yet. The officer certainly didn't know it yet, but the cracks were already forming, and soon they would shatter everything he thought he controlled. When Goliath doesn't see David's slingshot officer. Rigsby smirked, the kind of smirk that carried years of unchecked power behind it, the kind that said he'd dealt with people like her before, and it had always ended the same way, with them humiliated, with him winning. 4 minutes, huh? He drawled, voice dripping with derision. "You threatening me, lady?" He turned slightly, waving over his shoulder. Another uniformed officer, smaller, younger, eager, detached from the far wall and made his way toward them, hand instinctively drifting toward the taser clipped to his belt. Rigsby chuckled under his breath, like the outcome had already been decided. "You're gonna learn what real power feels like," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Jasmine remained motionless, her posture steady and unyielding, her fingers lightly brushing Carter's curls in a calming rhythm. The bank lobby seemed to tighten around them, air heavy with expectation, eyes darting nervously between Jasmine and the approaching officers. Behind the main counter, the assistant branch manager, Mr. Sloan, fumbled his way out of a side door. Balding, short, his dress shirt pulling awkwardly across his paunch, Sloan approached with a look that was equal parts panic and self-preservation. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Sloan asked, voice pitched high enough that it cracked slightly. Rigsby didn't even glance at him. "This woman's here on suspicious business. I'm handling it," he barked, tapping his radio with a sharp, impatient movement, like itching for backup that wasn't necessary or legal. Mr. Sloan opened his mouth, perhaps to ask for details, perhaps to suggest discretion. But one look at Rigsby's rigid jaw made him close it again. He took 2 hesitant steps back, wiping sweat from his brow with a crumpled handkerchief. Across the lobby, murmurs stirred. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. A young man near the ATM froze mid-transaction, uncertain whether to stay or bolt. And yet, at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood like the unmoved heart of a hurricane, calm, poised, deadly. "Officer," she said, her voice smooth as polished granite, "before you escalate this further, you should know a few things." Her hand moved, slow, deliberate, in full view of everyone. She didn't lunge. She didn't shout. She simply raised her phone a few inches higher and, with a soft click, turned the screen toward him. At first, Rigsby's eyes flicked downward lazily, expecting to see some half-hearted ID or a shaky explanation. Instead, he saw it. A black and gold badge shining under the glare of the fluorescent lights. Government clearance. Department of Justice. Civil Rights Division. And not just any badge. Senior Civil Rights Prosecutor. Special assignment. Investigating systemic racial discrimination in financial institutions and law enforcement. The reality of it hit the room like a thunderclap. Mr. Sloan visibly blanched, a hand flying to his chest. The junior officer faltered mid-step, his hand dropping away from his taser like it had burned him. Even the civilians who had been gawking a moment ago now shifted uncomfortably, some of them taking slow, instinctive steps backward, as if trying to distance themselves from the scene unfolding before them. Only Carter, still clinging to Jasmine's hand, seemed immune to the change, though his wide brown eyes flicked between the adults like he sensed a tidal wave approaching. The air crackled with a new, potent electricity, no longer charged by Rigsby's dominance, but by something heavier, more dangerous. Accountability. 4 minutes are almost up, Jasmine said softly, the faintest steel in her voice. Her words weren't a threat. They were a verdict. Rigsby stared at the badge, his smirk curdling into something uglier. Confusion, suspicion, a flicker of real fear. For a long second, he didn't move. And then, slowly, almost mechanically, he reached for his radio again. But this time his fingers weren't confident. They shook. Too late. From the far left hallway, a door burst open with a metallic clang that made the whole lobby jump. Through it came the banking compliance director, a woman in a navy blazer and severe bun, her face locked in a mask of furious professionalism. She clutched a clipboard in one hand, a flashing pager clipped to her waistband. Behind her, striding like a storm front in human form, was a man in a dark blue suit, his badge flashing briefly under the fluorescent lights. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Affairs Division. His expression was carved from granite, eyes sharp as scalpels. The room froze. Even the distant whirring of the printers and the hum of the heating vents seemed to die into silence. The FBI agent's gaze swept the lobby once, absorbing everything. The quivering boy, the stiffening civilians, the assistant manager shrinking into himself, the two officers standing far too close to a woman who was now revealed to be one of the most dangerous people they could have possibly antagonized. His jaw tightened. Without a word, he approached. Rigsby instinctively took a half-step back, his hand still hovering near his radio like a drowning man reaching for a branch that wasn't there. "Officer Rigsby," the agent said, his voice slicing the air. "You are to disarm immediately and await further instruction. Compliance is mandatory." The words landed with the force of a gavel striking the bench. The junior officer visibly paled. Mr. Sloan made a choking sound. The civilian bystanders watched with the stunned fascination of witnesses at the birth of a catastrophe. For a second, a long, suspended breath of a second, it seemed Rigsby might argue, but even he could see the writing on the wall. Slowly, stiffly, he unbuckled his belt, dropped his sidearm to the floor with a heavy metallic clunk, and laced his fingers behind his head. Carter flinched at the sound, burying his face against Jasmine's hip. Jasmine stroked his hair gently, never taking her eyes off Rigsby. This was not about victory, not yet. This was about letting the system choke on its own rot. The FBI agent turned to Jasmine next, his posture shifting, respectful, deferential, a subtle acknowledgement of her authority. "Ms. Crockett," he said, "are you prepared to make a formal statement regarding this incident?" Jasmine inhaled deeply. She could have nodded. She could have given a simple yes. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, her voice ringing clear across the silent lobby. "Not just about today," she said. "About every unlawful profiling incident Officer Rigsby and this institution have allowed to flourish under their watch, starting now." A collective exhale rippled through the room. Not relief, Not yet. Something closer to awe. The banking compliance director stepped forward, stammering apologies, trying to contain the blaze already consuming the lobby. But it was too late. The match had been lit. The powder keg was already exploding. Rigsby's face, once smug and unbothered, now twisted into something brittle, desperate. Because for the first time he realized the truth. He hadn't been dealing with a scared civilian, easily bullied and shoved aside. He had picked a fight with the storm itself, and the storm had receipts, justice cuts deeper than any badge. "Officer Rigsby, place your weapon on the ground and step back," the FBI agent said again, his voice sharp enough to slice the air cleanly in two. For a moment, no longer than a breath, no longer than a heartbeat, Rigsby hesitated. You could almost see the gears grinding in his head. He was used to being the final word in any room he entered. He was used to civilians shrinking back, not federal agents standing unblinking before him, a wall of authority that didn't bow, didn't flinch, didn't care about his badge, his seniority, or his reputation. The glint in the agent's eyes made something deep inside Rigsby crack. Because this was not a scolding. This was not a slap on the wrist. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Slowly, rigidly, he bent down, the entire lobby watching, no longer pretending not to see, but witnessing. The weight of the gun clattered against the marble floor, the sound louder than the murmur of horrified whispers that began to ripple among the bystanders. Rigsby straightened up, his face flushed an ugly shade of red, his fingers twitching at his sides as if he didn't quite know what to do with hands that were no longer powerful, no longer untouchable. The agent motioned to a uniformed officer, one not affiliated with the local bank's security detail, who moved forward with handcuffs in hand. The rattle of the metal echoed through the lobby as Rigsby's wrists were pulled roughly behind his back. It was the first time in years, maybe ever, that Blake Rigsby was powerless, truly powerless. The agent turned next to Jasmine, and the change in his demeanor was almost shocking in contrast. His spine was still straight, his posture still brimming with authority, but there was respect now. Deep, professional respect. "Ms. Crockett," he said, voice firm but no longer hard. "Are you willing to provide a formal statement about this incident?" Jasmine's fingers tightened briefly around Carter's hand, a small grounding squeeze for them both. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. There was no victory in her eyes, only a quiet, burning resolve that had carried her through law school, through court battles, through the endless, grinding indignities that so many chose to pretend didn't exist. She gathered Carter closer to her side, feeling his tiny body tremble with the aftershocks of the scene he had just witnessed. And then, in a voice as clear and deliberate as if she were standing before a jury, Jasmine said, "Yes, not just about today," she began, her eyes locking on Rigsby's retreating figure, "but about every unlawful profiling incident Officer Rigsby has ever committed. Because trust me, this isn't the first time. It's just the first time he picked the wrong woman." A hush fell over the lobby, the kind of silence that comes not from fear, but from awe. Somewhere behind the counter, Mr. Sloan made a sound like a deflating balloon, his sweaty face sagging into his hands. The junior officer who had backed Rigsby moments earlier stood stiffly against the wall, his gaze glued to the floor. Carter, still wide-eyed, tugged gently at Jasmine's sleeve and whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear, "You're like a superhero, Mom." Jasmine's heart clenched. Not from sadness, not from anger, from the fierce, blazing hope that maybe, just maybe, her son would grow up in a world a little less poisoned than the one she had inherited. Over the next few minutes, the scene shifted around them like a collapsing stage set. Rigsby was marched out of the bank in handcuffs, his boots scuffing loudly against the marble, the humiliation clinging to him like a second skin. Several customers fumbled for their phones, snapping pictures, recording videos, the modern witnesses to a downfall. Bank managers scrambled like ants, whispering frantically into their phones, darting glances toward Jasmine and the FBI agent as if hoping, praying, that there was still a way to contain the explosion. But there wasn't. The heart of the system had already been pierced, and the wound was only widening. The FBI agent stayed close to Jasmine, escorting her and Carter to a small conference room just off the main lobby. Inside, the harsh light softened a little, casting everything in a muted haze. A large table, a pitcher of untouched water, a whiteboard with yesterday's schedule still scrawled across it. Carter clambered up into a chair beside her, his legs swinging nervously. The agent took out a slim recorder, setting it gently on the table between them. "Ms. Crockett, I know this isn't easy," he said, his tone carefully respectful. "But the more details you can provide, the stronger our case will be. Not just against Officer Rigsby, but against any broader patterns we uncover during the investigation." Jasmine nodded. It wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be. Justice, real justice, was messy, painful, exhausting, but it was necessary. She spoke for nearly 30 minutes, her words measured but unflinching. The exact moment Rigsby first targeted her, the way he barked accusations without cause, the immediate escalation without any reasonable suspicion, the intimidation tactics, the aggressive posture, the hand drifting toward his weapon. The public humiliation inflicted upon her and, worse, upon her child. Every detail she recounted was a knife driven into the system that had protected men like Rigsby for far too long. When she finished, the agent clicked off the recorder and leaned back slightly. "That was thorough," he said, a hint of admiration coloring his words. "Thank you, Ms. Crockett. We'll be following up extensively. I can assure you, this will not be buried." Jasmine believed him, because for the first time in a very long time, she could feel the tide turning. Not with a roar, not with fireworks, but with the slow, inexorable pull of truth. The kind of force no badge, no title, no institution could hold back forever. Back in the lobby, the fallout continued to unfold. Reporters began arriving, tipped off by customers who couldn't resist leaking the explosive story. Bank executives, men in expensive suits with expensive smiles, rushed in from nearby offices, their faces tight with panic. A small group of customers gathered outside, whispering urgently to one another, their gazes flicking between the bank's doors and the flashing news cameras setting up across the street. Jasmine walked back into the main hall with Carter beside her, the agent discreetly shadowing them at a respectful distance. The walk felt different now, not because the stairs had stopped, they hadn't, but because Jasmine no longer cared about them. They could stare all they wanted, they could whisper and wonder and doubt. None of it mattered, because the system that had once counted on her silence had just watched her dismantle it, piece by corrupt piece, in front of everyone. And it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The fallout wasn't a slow burn. It came fast, it came brutal, and it came with a fury that even the most powerful people in Riverfront National Bank hadn't seen coming. Within 48 hours of the confrontation, the bank's board of directors convened an emergency meeting behind closed doors. What they had thought could be contained as a minor misunderstanding exploded into national news. Footage of Officer Rigsby being led out in handcuffs, stern, red-faced, humiliated, looped endlessly across every major network and social media feed. The public's appetite for justice, long starved, now roared with new life. By the 72nd hour, the CEO of Riverfront National, a man who had once brushed off allegations of isolated incidents with corporate jargon, stood behind a podium, cameras flashing, and issued a public apology. Not just to Jasmine Crockett, not just to Carter, but to the entire community the bank had quietly marginalized for decades. "We failed you," he said, voice strained. "We failed to create a place where every customer, regardless of background, feels safe and respected. And for that, we are profoundly sorry." But apologies were not enough. Because while the board scrambled, while PR teams drafted statements and polished excuses, the real earthquake was already rolling underneath them. Officer Blake Rigsby didn't simply lose his job. He was indicted on federal charges, racial profiling, abuse of authority, civil rights violations. The Justice Department moved quickly, using Jasmine's detailed testimony as the cornerstone of their case. And Rigsby, once a man who had laughed at the very idea of consequences, now sat in a holding cell awaiting trial. No badge, no gun, no shield to hide behind. The local police department, desperate to sever the gangrenous limb before it infected the whole body, made a public spectacle of taking allegations seriously. The police chief, a man who had personally signed off on many of Rigsby's promotions, resigned in disgrace within the week, citing personal reasons no one believed. Sweeps began. Internal investigations were launched, and every stone that was turned over revealed more rot beneath. Jasmine had not simply cracked the dam, she had shattered it. But Jasmine didn't stop with Rigsby. She didn't stop with a handful of resignations and apologies. She pressed forward with the full force of the Department of Justice behind her, launching a sweeping inquiry into racially biased banking practices across the entire region. Tellers, managers, executives, no one was safe from questioning. Patterns emerged. Data that had once been ignored, loan denials, account closures, predatory fees disproportionately targeting minority customers, became undeniable evidence of systemic discrimination. Community leaders rallied. Activists organized. Politicians, sensing the shift in the wind, jumped on board. By the end of the year, a piece of legislation, born from that single awful day at Riverfront National, passed through Congress with overwhelming support. It became known unofficially as Crockett's Law. Under Crockett's Law, banks and public financial institutions faced stricter oversight, harsher penalties for racial profiling, and mandatory training programs designed not as corporate window dressing, but as enforceable, accountable standards. For the first time in a long time, real change wasn't just demanded. It was written into law. And Jasmine Crockett's name was on the first page of history. But for Jasmine, the real victory wasn't found in the headlines. It wasn't in the congratulatory handshakes from government officials. It wasn't even in the framed newspaper article her colleagues gifted her, with the bold headline, "Woman Who Brought a System to Its Knees." The real victory came quietly, almost tenderly. It came on a crisp Saturday morning, almost a year after the confrontation, when Jasmine parked her car once again in front of Riverfront National Bank, now under completely new management, with new faces, new policies, and new promises etched into their mission statement. She stepped out of the car, smoothing Carter's jacket as he jumped down beside her. He was taller now, his head brushing her shoulder, but when he looked up at the bank's entrance, there was no fear in his eyes, only excitement. Together they walked into the lobby. No one stared, no one pointed, no one whispered behind hands. The marble floor still shined. The fluorescent lights still buzzed faintly overhead. But the air had changed. It was freer, lighter, open. At the counter, a young black teller greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Jasmine slid the check across the counter. "We're opening a college savings account," she said, pride swelling in her chest. As Carter leaned up on his tiptoes to sign his name on the deposit form, Jasmine felt the world tilt. Not violently, not with the force of a revolution, but with the slow, inevitable momentum of justice finally beginning to turn. No shouting, no stares, no fear. Just the quiet dignity of a mother who knew she hadn't just survived injustice. She had shattered it, pulverized it, rewritten the story for her son, and for every child who would come after. And as Carter looked up at her, eyes shining with pride and something even deeper, belief, Jasmine Crockett knew. No badge, no system, no prejudice could ever silence the truth for long. Because once you tear the mask off injustice, once you rip the rotten roots from the ground, they don't grow back. Not if you make sure the world never forgets how you made them fall.